A lot of people with cats and gardens put these wires around, around their gardens, and they put this collar around the cat's neck. And the cats then wander around not knowing what's going on. They get near to this wire and they get an electric shock. But after about a week or two, the cats don't go near those wires. And what we've now got in our culture is those wires now are all over the place. So we've all got these little collars around us, electrocuting us. But the worst thing is we now don't even know where they are.
Hello and welcome to TRIGGERnometry. I'm Francis Foster.
I'm Konstantin Kisin.
And this is a show for you if you want honest conversations with fascinating people.
Our guest today is a practicing and published psychotherapist, Andrew Thomas. Welcome to TRIGGERnometry.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Why am I saying welcome? It's great to be here.
You've taken over the space. You feel right at home. You did allude to the fact that you work with couples before we started, and you said this felt a little bit like it, and I did complain there's not enough sex in this relationship.
Well, we can work on that afterwards, shall we?
I
We
hope
can
so.
put a half hour into that.
I
I'm sure we
absolutely
can
hope so. We need
do
to
something about
get more love into this. But look, joking aside, it's great to have you on. I'll be honest with our audience. We got you on because you got in touch with us and you had some very interesting things you wanted to talk to us about from a psychotherapist perspective, but particularly relevant to the political context. And one of those things was the idea that people live right and vote left. So talk to us about that.
So we have across the Western world now a large part of the middle classes who the way they live their lives is from my perspective admirable. They're resilient, they take responsibility for their outcomes in their lives, they work really hard. If they meet obstacles in their way, they try to overcome them. In fact, they really largely look into themselves for the resilience and the resources and the capacity to learn to overcome the problems and achieve what they're hoping to achieve. And the other thing is they raise their children in that light. So they raise their children to be resilient, resourceful, adaptive. But when they go into the voting booth, they vote for parties that promote policies and a cultural outlook that are largely, in many ways, diametrically opposite to the way they actually live their lives themselves. I mean, not to be too political, we have the classic case of Diane Abbott, doyenne of the left, whose son went to a private school. So the way she actually lived her life, lives her life, she hasn't gone yet, lives her life compared to how she actually votes and the types of policies she supports, they're diametrically opposite.
So this is very interesting, Andrew, because this is one of the things that I've been kind of chronicling in some of the articles I've written and in my book that I'm working on, etc., which is that there is often an inconsistency between the things that people do and the things that people say one ought to do or that you ought to do. So what is your theory about why that's happening?
Well, just say, I'm increasingly uneasy about the labeling virtue signaler and woke and all the rest of it. Take Diane Abbott. What achievements she's had in her life. What barriers she's broken down and overcome. And I'm increasingly uneasy about how people are, so that the polarization and the labeling that's going on. But the drivers behind that there's a number of core, if you want me to talk about the sort of psychological, and also the evolutionary psychological and the neuroscientific drivers behind that, is that we have, there's two things that genetics are an important factor in our propensity to experience anxiety, depression. So if you read a book called Blueprint by Robert Plomin, you'll see a wonderful resume and a coverage of where we are in understanding that, but it's looking really very convincing that our genetics are very influential. But it's also how they interact with the environment. If you put an environment around young children that's chaotic, uncertain, where their attachment is being switched on, switched off, you're going to start to get more and more children growing into adults who demonstrate, sort of what we would say maladaptive avoidant behavioral patterns. So a study has been done that people who have got left of centre leanings have got a greater propensity towards anxiety and seeing the world through what I would call a floppy lens. So what do I mean by a floppy lens? Well, there's a tendency to trigger into a survival type of pattern. So imagine 100,000 years ago, you're walking through the bush to pick berries or whatever. You come to a clearing, and on the other side, there's a berry bush, but it's moving in a strange way. All the birds have gone a bit quiet, and there's nothing else moving. What happens is you focus. So everything focuses. So you focus on the bush. The next thing is you overreact. So your survival system, you start to get adrenaline pumping through your system. So you overreact. So you get F, you focus, you overreact, and P is you become pessimistic. So we know from David Attenborough documentaries that there are far more antelope than there are tigers. But you'll be pessimistic because you'll see that the bush is likely to have behind it the most incredibly big tiger that hasn't eaten for 3 weeks with a taste just for you. So you focus, you overreact, you're pessimistic, and you get it as a package. The reason you get it as a package is it's no use focusing and being pessimistic if you don't overreact. Because if that lion comes out and you haven't started to overreact, it might make 5 meters to you before your adrenaline system starts going. Okay? And so that could be the difference between you getting your DNA into the next generation or not. So you focus, you overreact, you're pessimistic, you get it as a package, and the I is it's inaccurate. And the reason why evolution has made that inaccurate is 100,000 years ago, you could run away many times but only eaten once.
It's better to overreact just in case to be safe.
So that is a survival system that's in every single one of us, 7.8 billion of us, that we've got that in us. So if you then couple that with an early stage development, I'm going to sound a bit clinical, the system, early stage family life for children, where is dad there or dad not there? Is dad looking at the mobile phone? Is dad not looking at the mobile phone? Is mum there or no? Or is she there or not there? You know, oh, where did dad go? There's a new man in the house or whatever. So that is likely to develop a higher proportion of your society with a heightened floppy reaction to the world around them.
And has that happened? Have people been growing up in increasingly unstable childhood environments?
Well, yeah, since the 1950s, yeah, it looks like what you're saying is, I mean, this isn't sort of saying, you know, there's a stereotypical, if you're like this, it's going to be dreadful. But overall, the challenge of raising a child, I mean, the correlation between single parent families and all sorts of things that happen in life is not good, because it's incredibly challenging to raise a child by yourself. There are many single parents that do that, but there are also now, because I sit in rooms with couples that have, you know, for thousands of hours, it's not confined just to single parenting, you know, the pressures, this self-actualizing goal that generates this incredible high hours working culture, where whatever car you've got, you know, whatever look you've got, you know that you've managed to attain will fade quite quickly. So we do have a society that in many ways is sort of set to generate a proportion of coming back to the irony, if you look at the middle classes, their goal is stability. You know, they do whatever they can to create a stable environment around their children. You could say some are over the top, you know, tiger parents. But the outcome of a lot of policies today is to create incredible uncertainty in a lot of households, which the survival system, the attachment system of young children, especially at the age of 2, 3, 4, 5, are hypersensitive to. And at those ages, they're experimenting with different behavioral patterns. So if mum or dad are unavailable or incredibly angry, then they may experiment with a shutdown type of survival system, which is to self-anesthetize. Or they may start to experiment and develop what I call a legacy behavior, which is an acting out type of behavioral pattern, which is dragging the attention of the parent back onto them in any way that system can do. So if you've got a society, a culture that's generating sort of more fragile, more floppy orientated styles of behavior, and then along comes the noughties, and we have social media, we have the capacity, and I'm coming back onto the middle classes now. So if you've got a greater proportion of the middle classes who are likely to trigger at a lower level of activation into a floppy-like response, if you get that and then you ram social media into that and the incredible OLED screens and high definition and surround sound, and then then people get into their own silos because it's much less threatening to be out of your silo. What you're going to do is you're going to get people sort of triggering and trying to find ways to rid themselves of the discomfort in terms of the dichotomy between their comfortable lives and the chaos, terror, the burning fires in Australia or California and their comfortable lives. And so if you have a tendency to trigger into a floppy-like state, you're going to really just reach out for really quite sort of immediate solutions to calm yourself. So you'll be looking for avoidant styles of behavior. Also, if your neighbors are talking about how dreadful the world is, how the world's going to come to an end, very soon, then again, remember that attachment metric is playing out in those relationships as well.
But isn't there also a vested interest in society? Because the more floppy-like behaviour people have, the more likely they are to be good consumers, to buy things, to desire things, to this constant consumption that we have in our society, which is necessary to keep the economy growing.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if it's self-actualization, which is the never achievable goal. I mean, if you go out and buy a book on meditation, and 2 years later you're self-levitating above some glass-like Andean lake, and out of the corner of your eye you see Sting with Trudy having tantric sex 4 foot above the lake, well, what are you going to do? You've somehow got to do your meditation even better. Now, this avoidant way of looking at things, the driver, it isn't nihilistic. It isn't sort of we should not try to do anything. It's more about actually being able to look at the drivers for your behavior and look at them that they are driven by your behavioral patterns, by how your system got trained. By this whole physiology, this whole neuroscience, this whole neurological system, which you've got. And that it means that if you've got it and that's what's driving it, you've actually got the hands on the levers. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try your best, push yourself as hard as you can, but that goal, that drive can come out of much more understanding of how positive or negative it is for you in your life, given how you are and the resources you've got, rather than just being handed down this existential goal that Maslow came up with in 1943.
In many ways, isn't the pinnacle of self-actualization social media, where you can actually curate the way you want people to see you, the way you want to be viewed, who you are? If you look at something like Instagram, you can physically change the way you look. You can create this life which actually has no bearing on your real life whatsoever.
It's the pinnacle of avoidance. It allows you to sculpt your avoidant behavior in any way, shape or form you like. I mean, that I mean, Jeff Bezos, not Jeff Bezos, who's the Facebook guy?
Oh, Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg. I mean, he probably thinks he's the greatest business person ever in the whole wide world.
I mean, his bank balance would say so.
Yeah, well, it would do, but this avoidant style of behavior isn't recent. It's been going, the first Homo sapiens 200,000 years ago, we developed language, 50 to 100,000 years ago. We've wanted to have the best possible level of attachment we can have with the people around us for 100,000 years. And along comes social media, and hey presto, you're in a society that is slicing and dicing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and hey presto, you can just suddenly find other people who've got the same avoidant behavioural patterns as you have. So, Zuckerberg may have thought, well, God, I've created this incredible thing that I've pushed onto it, but the human race has just been gagging for Facebook for a couple of 100,000 years. It fed into a phenomenal demand, but that demand has also been driven by this culture of the right way to speak, the right way to look, the right way to behave. And if you look at the education of young children now, or males or female or whatever, there are so many criteria now that mean you're either in or you're out. I mean, I don't know if you know any people with cats. Well, a lot of people with cats in gardens put these wires around, around their gardens, and they put this collar around the cat's neck. And the cats then wander around not knowing what's going on. They get near to this wire and they get an electric shock. But after about a week or two, the cats don't go near those wires. And what we've now got in our culture is those wires now are all over the place. So we've all got these little collars around us, electrocuting us. But the worst thing is we now don't even know where they are.
It's so good that you bring that up, because as you know, it's one of the things we've talked a lot about on the show, which is the idea of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Why suddenly it seems like, to me at least, things that we used to all be able to debate, to discuss, to let people have wrong opinions, to let people have bad opinions, to let people have whatever opinions they wanted. I mean, look at, there's a lot of talk now about how we've got to shut down conspiracy theories and ideas about what's causing the pandemic, or why are there lockdowns, or why is this and why is that. Whereas 20 years ago, you had 9/11, a huge terrorist attack, loads of conspiracy theories flying about all the time. It never occurred to anyone that they should be shut down. I remember watching conspiracy documentaries about 9/11 on social media, or on later in the day, but also on TV. It was considered a normal part of the social discourse about things, that people are allowed to have different thoughts about different things, even if they're completely wrong. And yet we've got to a position where now we seem to desire a massive crackdown on that.
But if you look at that through the lens of the live right, vote left middle classes, who have the handles on the levers of power in society, they're in the think tanks, they're in the schools, they're in the universities, they're the sort of people who become MPs, be they Labour, Lib Dem or Conservative. Those live right, vote left. Well, maybe not the Conservatives, but
also the Conservatives now.
Yeah, well, possibly, yeah. Freudian slip there. But if you look at it, the cognitive dissonance that's possible for them, which is are you aware with cognitive dissonance?
Yes.
No wonder they don't want to talk to their friends about politics or economics that maybe see things differently, because that might generate a sense of cognitive dissonance between how they live and how they vote that will generates a sort of floppy type reaction. People get triggered up. So that's why you see in the middle class circles, if ever people shying away from talking about politics because it's really uncomfortable. I mean, that if you I don't know how we're going to get through this, but if you look at the 1970s, that was a wonderful example of cognitive dissonance. People think that Margaret Thatcher came in and she was this incredible leader with this vision. I see it slightly differently. Is that in the 1970s, People who'd bought into socialism, nationalisation, state control, sort of the state could somehow define which industries were the best to go in to and invest in. Well, in the 1970s, those very same people ended up walking past piles of rubbish, or lighting their homes with candles, or experiencing 3-day weeks, or I think it was in 1917, 29 million days of strikes. And that was an incredible cognitive dissonant experience that challenged their views. And that is what I think Margaret Thatcher was able to build on. She was able to, she came into a society that had in a way been partially reconditioned. And at the moment, what we have is a society that enables people, through the incredible printing presses, modern monetary theory, that enables us to insulate ourselves from whatever views we might want, because theoretically society is so incredibly wealthy.
In other words, we can advocate, let's say, just hypothetically speaking, for open borders without thinking of the consequences that would have on the country, let's say. Not least because we are insulated ourselves from them.
Well, the people in power, and the middle classes that may hold those views, might live in very leafy monocultural environments. They have maybe the financial muscle to buy houses in the catchment area of the best schools. Their children will typically go to Russell Group universities. They'll compete for jobs that require very high levels of English skills that maybe aren't competing at the other end. But I don't hold that. If you look at those people, they're models of industriousness. I mean, that's the problem. When you start to go down that rabbit hole, you can start to become condemning. But they actually mimic, really ideal behaviours.
What I would be condemning is advocating for things with no regard for the impact of those things on other people. I am happy to engage in discussion with those people. I don't believe they're disgusting. I don't believe that they're immoral. I just think that they are mistaken. And if we were to have a conversation, I hope that we could change each other's minds and come to a compromise. What I have found, though, one of my best friends is, one of these kind of almost loony lefties, if you like.
Yeah.
And whenever we have a conversation, I've got him to say this many times. I go, look, I'm an immigrant, right? You realize that when you allow large numbers of people to come into a country without the opportunity to integrate properly, it causes problems, don't you? He'll go, yes, yes, yes. And I talk him through the whole thing. And he goes, look, I understand all of that. I just think we should have open borders.
What we're witnessing there is an avoidant behavioural pattern.
Right.
So what's driving him to behave like that, which you find frustrating? I mean, if you were really, what I'm hearing for a lot of people in this situation, if they try to engage in people who do the live right, vote left stuff, if you maybe your friend doesn't sort of live right, I don't know, but what they're experiencing is they get very upset very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knows.
You've got a good point there. Yeah, they do.
Yeah. So and what you're witnessing is an avoidant behavioural pattern, because it's conversation over.
Yes.
Yeah, it's conversation over. Let's split up. Let's move apart, and let's not address it. But that is a survival orientated. That's an avoidant orientated behavioural.
So what can we do about that as a society? Because it seems to me that it's quite important for people to be able to discuss practical ideas about the direction of travel. Do we take a left turn? Do we take a right turn? Do we keep going straight? Do we slam on the brakes? That, to me, is a practical conversation about ensuring the well-being of everybody going forward, particularly our children, grandchildren, etc. We've got important decisions to make as a society, right?
Yeah.
So how do we bridge those divides? How do we, within ourselves and particularly with other people?
Well, I'd like to say we shift away from Maslow's conception at the higher end, that it's self-actualization, and we move to a more accurate and a sort of a more accurate model of what human motivation and human drive is really made up of.
Okay.
And move to a place where more of us, many more of us in the West, are aware of what drives our emotional life, what causes us to trigger. So for your good friend who says, well, blah, de blah, well, he doesn't sound like he gets really angry, but he almost sounds like he sort of withdraws. He sort of shuts down from the debate, which is another avoidance style of behavior. He sort of self-anesthetizes it because he just doesn't want to go there.
Yes.
Because to touch on that live rail would really generate a lot of discomfort. So if he could become more aware of how he triggers around these subjects. So he could actually notice I developed this other model, which is the reflective mind, reactive brain, and reactive body. So, this system is phenomenally complex. And you can go on training courses now that pick up individual parts of the brain and they say it does this or that. So what I decided to do in my work was create a model that enabled clients to really just see the basic core system of the human, which is a capacity to be reflective, the reflective mind, the reactive brain, which is going all the time. Yours is going on at the time. What is this guy going on about? Whatever. You're not asking it to do that. It's just ramming narrative and sensations, narrative into the surface of your brain and sensations across your body. So you've got a reactive body and a reactive brain that's constantly interacting. So if we can, a lot of the work I'm doing now and other therapists who are using the rainbow map, or if you want to go sensory motor therapy, is we're trying to enable our clients to notice their system triggering. So I've got this one concept which is called a trigger flag, which is typically a physical sensation. So as a lot of people trigger, they notice their throats go or the jaws go. And if you can notice yourself triggering or withdrawing, you can actually then exert a little bit more choice about whether, here goes Constantine. This is the experience I've got. I feel really uneasy about this. I just want to shut this conversation down. I don't want to go there. If you can actually notice that driver, then you can exert more choice about whether you obey it or overrule it. So there's two ways out of this that we've got in the West. We're either going to go through a 1970s and we're going to get cognitive dissonance. There's going to be widespread. It wasn't meant to work like this. I mean, a lot of people are starting to look at it like that, aren't they? That hold on, so if we were, if we were trying to clear the area, like we've made everyone able to get a degree now, the last year, whether they turn up to university or not, that whole thing, of self-actualization. If self-actualization, the politicians of the last 30 years, if part of self-actualization in our society is everyone's going to get a degree, everyone can have a degree. But we're also already starting to see the cognitive dissonance getting in there because companies can't tell the difference now. And degrees are going down and down in value. So maybe we'll get the cognitive dissonant bit by bit and we'll be able to sort of turn the corner, or maybe it will be a 1970s type of mass cognitive dissonance where you really see what you get when you nationalize everything.
Isn't it? Look,
or not everything. So, and the other thing is more awareness of how your survival system triggers.
Look, this is all very intelligent, and you're a far more intelligent man than me, and good luck to you. Isn't it a question of just being fucking brave and having a little bit of balls and saying what you think? Do you know, we feel uncomfortable. We feel uncomfortable at certain points. When I started my teaching career, I felt uncomfortable and being in front of 30 kids. But you have to do it in order to have a career. You feel uncomfortable when you ask a woman out, but otherwise you're never going to have sex. Why is it that we now have a culture where we feel bad about being uncomfortable? Life's uncomfortable, isn't it? Or am I just getting old?
Yeah, but we've all got metaphorical...
You are getting old, but...
we've all got metaphorical collars around our necks that electrocute ourselves. So you've got lovely, this stuff about the live right, vote left middle classes. we've all got friends like that. And we love them and like them, and connect very strongly. And if you come out, and I've tried it a few times, if you come out and try to challenge them, I mean, this is a cult. They'll double down and you'll lose your friends. That's the way it seems at the moment. I mean, how do you actually try to engage in conversations with people who, if they start to get into that conversation, will become increasingly uncomfortable because of that cognitive dissonance? I mean, it's a psychological driver for them. They trigger, and then the reflective mind starts shutting down. So with your friend, the capacity to be reflective starts to go down, and the reactive brain and reactive body start to dominate. I mean, I'll give you a quick example in this. I mean, the door to this room is over there, okay? If that handle goes down, I can guarantee you instantaneously, every single one of our reflective minds will shut instantaneously because we'll all turn and look around there. And that's an example of compulsive behavior. And that's what you're dealing with. So as you start with your friend, you say, come on, you're just wrong. Come on, look at this. How does that work?
Not very well, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
And do you think that school has got a part to play in this, and the way we raise kids? Well, we want kids to be safe. We want to protect them. And I've seen it in schools that I've taught in. We want to mollycoddle them. We want them to be as safe as possible all the time, every single minute of every day. So that when they actually get confronted by a challenge or a disagreement, they don't know how to deal with it.
Well, we've got, this safety culture, a sort of, in a way, an exploitation of Bowlby's attachment theory from 1958. We've got a society now that is, social workers, psychologists who are so well versed in attachment. With the view that if you have any level of detachment, we've got to somehow stop that. But where I think we're getting it wrong, it's the direction that the detachment. I mean, I think it would have been better if you called it detachment theory, because from a survival perspective, you can't be breastfeeding when you're 20. 100,000 years ago, you're doing a hunt and the tigers or the antelopes there, oh, just wait, I've got a break because I need to go to mum to have a bit of a top up. I mean, it wasn't really a survival orientated, advantageous way of behaving. So from the point of birth, the child has to learn to detach from the parent. So what we're sort of getting sort of mixed up is a clear understanding of where that detachment comes from. So if the parents are very stable, they're there, it's the healthy form of detachment if it's engineered from the child's end. Okay, so the child experiments at 2 or 3 or 4 and they push more and more distance between them, but they know if they want to turn around and come back, that security is there. But on the other hand, you also need elements of parental forced attachment. So, oh my God, the parent isn't there. It depends on frequency and degree. If the parent is constantly detaching and doing it to a really brutal extent, then you're likely to train that child's survival system into developing maladaptive behavioral patterns. But what we can't do as society or parents is in a way say, protect the children, give people trigger warnings all over the place. I mean, the actual experience of being triggered, of being upset, is a developmental experience. I mean, it's all about degrees, isn't it?
When you say it's a developmental experience, just to translate it into simple language, what you mean is you have to go through life and experience being triggered, quote unquote, in order to grow.
Yes. Yeah. I can give you a little bit more.
No, it's good. I think
Yeah.
the simple yes is good.
Yeah, I
actually.
was just about to go off into it all.
Yeah. So you need to, Francis was saying this. You need to experience discomfort in order to be a fully fledged human being. I know this from my own life, and this is why this whole ideology, to some extent, this is why we've been talking about this stuff. I know that almost everything that I've ever done in my life that's been worthwhile, in my opinion, has involved extreme discomfort at some level. Every single thing, whether it's work, whether it's relationship, whether it's my own personal development as a human being, whether it's reading an important book, right? It's required discipline and sticking with it, and sometimes reading a bit that I wasn't interested. Like, do you see what I'm saying? This idea that we must avoid discomfort as the greatest objective of our existence is absurd.
But there's a more fundamental driver and need behind that as well, because I talked to you about those what I call trigger packages earlier. If you 100,000 years ago, if you're 4 years old, there's a forest fire comes in, you smell the acrid smoke, you see the expressions of the faces around you, you feel the heat, and you hear the screaming, and you manage to just get out with your life. The trauma-based learning system is going to create trigger packages that will endure for the rest of your life. Why? Because you don't experience another forest fire for the next 20 or 30 years. You know, you happen to be 32 or 33, you get the faintest whiff of acrid smoke, and bingo, you get that experience, that incredibly powerful, visceral experience, and you become alert to what's going on around you, and you're forewarned, and you get the hell out. Okay. Evolution has it that those trigger packages are incredibly resilient. They don't shift. But the other thing about them is they can be reconditioned when they crack open. So a lot of therapeutic approaches today, like CBT, cognitive behavioral theory, therapy orientated towards phobias, is actually causing the person to trigger in a sort of minor way and then an increasing way around, say, spiders or flying or whatever, because what it's actually doing is cracking open that trigger package, but in a manageable way, and then piling in new narratives. So when it shuts down again, it's less potent. And when it opens up again, there will be maybe other narratives and more restorative resources, so it doesn't overwhelm you. So to come back to you, yeah, I mean, triggering, overcoming challenges, having upsets are all really opportunities to recondition. I mean, we don't want this to say, you know, abusive behavior, violence, sexual abuse. Those aren't constructive experiences. No. You know, they're incredibly damaging.
I'm pretty sure that's always been universally understood. Yeah. Though. I think what's happened in recent years is an attempt to conflate those things that you're talking about, violence, abuse, etc., with ordinary experiences in life. That's why people now talk about language as being violence, right? The words are now considered violence by some people, because it's an attempt to conflate the two. And I think it's quite a deliberate attempt, because it's a way of getting power over other people.
Yeah, I don't see it quite like that. I think the people who are saying that, a lot of, maybe some people are like that, but quite a lot of the people are genuinely triggered. You know, that sense of vulnerability, you know, the anxiety, the fear, the pain, I think is quite real. What we have to look is how do people end up developing to have that type of sensitivity? So yeah, no, I see it slightly differently.
I take your point. So just to summarize, because you've already made this point, I take it, your conception of this is that people are hypersensitive. Am I okay to use that term?
Not everyone. I mean, there's a increasing proportion of society, yes, that are powerfully triggerable.
And they are very easy to trigger because the unstable childhood environment they grew up in, combined with the education system, combined with blah, blah, blah. And social media.
Yeah, you got to be a bit careful with that because okay parenting is a very broad spectrum of parenting. Sure. Okay, so the branches of parenting that will really predictably generate sort of discordant behavioral patterns in life, you know, in the upper and lower quartiles of that sort of distribution. So this isn't a message to parents that they somehow have to be perfect parents. Just being okay is largely good, and then it's how your genetics interact with the environment that then really make the difference. But if you are starting to generate a society where the electric wires are encroaching, then you're pushing more people. That shape of that distribution curve is changing, and more people are starting to grow up with triggering systems, as I might call it, that are on a hairline, that are really sensitized to going off to any perceived threat and generate really powerful levels of discomfort.
I mean, it's a very, very, very good point. Look, how much of this is also a type of narcissistic behavior as well, whereby someone goes to a comedy night, for instance, they hear a joke, everyone laughs, or the vast majority of people laugh, they feel it's disgusting, therefore they want to set the parameters of what is and what isn't acceptable because of the way they see the world. Isn't that a form of narcissism as well?
Well, you're seeing someone behave, driven by an attachment form of behaviour. Well, their behaviour is really trying to, in a way, reattach themselves to whoever they perceive to be their attachment group. So they're experiencing, sort of quite a visceral sort of physical experience, or maybe narratives are really punching into their brains that are really powerful. And a bit like your friend, that joke has pushed them onto the live wire. And so now with social media, they can go straight to that. And that's a classic avoidant behavioural pattern. They'll sate their discomfort by going out onto social media and demonstrating their virtue, and that they don't align with that type of joke or that type of thinking, and that will calm them down.
Well, here's the thing, though, because Francis' question, I think, is very good, because I remember a situation where I was performing in a comedy show and my wife was there, and she had literally just come back from Ukraine from her grandmother's funeral. And the comedian who was on before me was doing material, pretty funny material, about pushing his grandmother down the stairs. It was a comedy routine.
Yeah.
And my wife, being a normal person, obviously, she was feeling a bit raw. Her grandmother, who was important in her life, had just died. Got up, went to the toilet, got a drink of water, waited for this comedian to get off stage, came back in the room and watched the rest of the show, right? She was not untriggered by him making jokes about a very raw subject for her at that time.
Yeah. But
But it never occurred to her to go on social media and to sate her whatever in that way. So what is the difference between her and someone who feels, that's what I think Francis is getting at when he talks about narcissism?
Well, a couple of things. How well does it work when you write an article and you label group people narcissist? I mean, how convincing is that? How do people react when you sort of label them with really quite negative sort of
We're just
style?
asking you the question.
Yeah.
To me, it's not a question of persuasiveness. To me, it's a question of accuracy. Is it accurate or not to say that partly this is driven by narcissism?
I suppose what you're looking at and you're talking to as a person who is looking at the behavioural patterns and the drivers behind that, which is, the couple work I do, the hundreds and hundreds of couples I've sat with, far more difficult than the two of you. So, over the years. And they, and because they are coming in, they're talking about the real nuts and bolts of what's happening in their relationships, and then they talk about one of their children who's just been labelled ADHD, or some other label that's been given to them by a child psychologist. Now, there probably are children with ADHD or abnormal, but if that child psychologist were to really hear what I've heard about what's really going on in that family, they would marvel that that kid even gets out of bed in the morning. When you hear what goes, I hear stuff that you just wouldn't believe. And so we're mislabeling people all over the place in our society today. I mean, it's an easy thing to do, isn't it? It just is label person. I mean, I've been guilty of it until about 6 to 9 months ago, because, my thinking around this has been evolving. I might have been calling people virtue signals. I don't really do that now. I don't do that because I just think that the people I think about who are virtuous are actually really great people. But
I'm not saying they're bad people.
But they trigger But they trigger and they
But hold on,
avoid the
we have
cognitive
to be able
dissonance.
to describe things accurately, though. I get this whole
I
non-judgment
get where you're
thing.
coming from.
I get it, but at the same time, I personally know people, and I know in myself the temptation to signal virtue on social media. I know it in myself, right?
Yeah.
It exists in all of
I
us.
would never do that.
No, sure, mate. Right. Well
That's
done.
a great virtue signal.
It's a great virtue
Come
signal
on,
right
come
there.
on.
So this is my point: is we all have the instinct in us to get attention from the community, the society,
To
the tribe,
attach.
to attach, right?
To attach.
So
to attach.
to say that somebody is engaging in virtue signaling is not to say that they're a bad person or that they're immoral. It is to say that they're engaging in a behavior that I recognize.
Look. I think we're three of us. We're all seeing, this identitarian culture where minority groups are being convinced that any problems that they have in their lives have got nothing to do with them. It's got everything to do with the society around them. I'm not saying, society doesn't have its problems and don't negatively influence groups, but to send a message to certain minority groups or groups of people that it's nothing to do with you, don't ever look at your behavior, just look outside of yourself. Well, yeah, that is incredibly damaging. But the reason why I quite like the live right, vote left is it's actually descriptive of the behavior.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whereas virtue signaler is a sort of quite a pejorative term, but where you could argue, yeah, well, that's actually a description of the behavior, I suppose. But so it sort of have a sense that it's quite sort of just quite pejorative, it's a put down, isn't it? And I have to say, I've been guilty of that myself in years gone by. But it doesn't work. It just pisses people off.
No, it's
What if you want to piss them off?
yeah. I mean,
Well,
that's
then go for it. Yeah.
Then you drive engagement on social media.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
We got to wrap up, man.
There's one more question that I wanted to ask, right, which is this. Why have we started to conflate mental health with mental illness? And we use these two terms interchangeably when they obviously have very, very different meanings.
Well, if you read a book called Black Rainbow by, what's her name? Rachel, it will come to me. Black Rainbow, it's about this Times journalist's journey through her mental illness over 20 years. And if you ever want to get an understanding of what is the difference, what is mental health, what really is mental illness, read that book, because she eviscerates herself. You may not, she's very wealthy, has got the ideal life, but she turns her pen on herself in the most unremitting way. And if ever you want to get an understanding of what the difference is, I mean, basically mental illness, mental health is you're basically engaging in behavioral patterns that are getting in the way of you experiencing your life in the way you want to. Getting up and being a bit sad in the morning is something different. But, I think in this, I've listened to a few podcasts, you ask at the, if you want to ask me that final question you do, I might be able to respond to that a little bit more.
What's the one thing we're not talking about that we really should be?
Seamless.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I think it's the way people in the public eye are talking about the experience of psychotherapy. It's great. I mean, it's fine to say, hey, I've been to see a psychotherapist, or I went with, I had these issues. But what we're starting to see is people talk about what they actually talk about in the psychotherapy session. In the public eye. They're talking about relations or what people did or what people said. And what they're doing, unwittingly probably, is they're weaponizing the actual psychotherapy session. And one of the most precious things about psychotherapy in our culture today is the perception that if you sit with someone like me or any of my peers who are in the mainstream therapeutic organization, the BACP, any of these sort of psychological mainstream, we're all really tied into really strong senses of ethics around confidentiality. And if we start to challenge through what we talk about that actually happens in the session publicly, then you're starting to create an impression that, what's talked about in there can just be spread everywhere. And I think that's a retrograde step. And the next thing is starting to get, and I think coming back to your question, Francis, is starting to get a bit more of a gauge about when they're accessing psychotherapy. So it's okay to feel a bit sad at times. It's okay to feel a bit angry at times. That's not a mental illness. If you're being angry all the time or sad all the time, that could well be a problem. But I think people in the public eye need to think a little bit more about how they're communicating the degree of the mental health issues that are causing them to go to therapy or not. So I'd like that to be the awareness of how people in public eye talk about the reasons why they go to therapy, what happens to therapy, and the degree of the issues that cause them to go to therapy. I think that would, in a way, preserve and protect the sanctity and the effectiveness of therapy, regardless of how you practice it.
And that is a wonderful point to end the show. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to find you, where is the best place to do that?
Well, I'm now, delivering a public workshops, 2-hour workshops. Oh, by the way, all the training I do is not for profit. So I charge as little as I can. And a third of all the revenues that I generate go to the charity shelter because of the connection between mental health and homelessness.
Andrew Thomas, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's been really interesting, really fascinating to meet you and talk to you. Thank you.
You
Likewise.
as well. Likewise. And thank you for watching and listening. We will see you very soon with another interview. All of them go out at 7 p.m. UK time. And of course, you can catch a Raw show as well. We've got those 4 nights a week, 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Take care and see you soon, guys. We hope you've enjoyed this incredible interview. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell button so that you never miss another fantastic episode.
And if you believe that the work we do here at TRIGGERnometry is important, support us by joining our locals community using the link below.